Day 14, roughly halfway through this entire experiment. My bank app buzzed at 3:47 in the morning. I almost didn't even look. I really should have just kept sleeping, honestly. But something told me to check it anyway, and when I finally did, my stomach genuinely dropped. The AI had moved $400 out of my checking account without asking me. No warning at all whatsoever, no confirmation text sent to me. Just gone, transferred into an investment account I didn't even remember linking. For a second I genuinely, truly thought I'd been hacked, that someone else was inside my account. I hadn't actually been hacked at all. This was exactly, precisely what I had signed up for. 30 days. Earlier, I made a decision that a lot of people online told me was insane. I handed over full control of my personal finances to artificial intelligence. Every single dollar, every bill, every spending decision. Big or small, no human oversight whatsoever. No, let me just double check this real quick. Just me, myself, my bank accounts, and a machine that was about to learn more about my financial habits than my own family knows. And what happened over the next 30 days changed the way I think about money, about AI, and honestly, more than anything, about how much real control we actually have over our own lives without even realizing it, day to day. Stick around until the very end, because trust me, it's worth it, and by the end of this video you're going to see the exact numbers. What I made, what I lost, the mistake that nearly wiped out my savings. And the one decision the AI made that I will never be able to make on my own again. This is not a sponsored, scripted, AI is amazing, video paid for by some fintech company. This is what actually happens when you let the machine drive. Let's get into exactly what happened, day by day, starting from the very beginning. The setup, why I did this. A few months ago I started noticing something. Every single finance creator on this platform was suddenly obsessed with one question: can artificial intelligence manage your money better than you can? And normally I'd scroll past that kind of thing. But then I looked at my own bank statement. Late fees I'd forgotten about. A subscription I'd been paying for since 2023 that I never once used. Impulse purchases at 11 at night that I couldn't even remember making. If I was being honest with myself, my financial management system was just vibes and anxiety. So I asked myself a genuinely uncomfortable question. What if the reason I keep making the same money mistakes isn't laziness, it's that human brains are terrible at this. We're wired for instant gratification, not long-term optimization. We panic sell, we impulse buy, we avoid opening the banking app for 2 weeks. Because we're scared of what we'll see. An AI doesn't have any of that baggage. It doesn't feel embarrassed. It doesn't avoid the numbers. It doesn't spend money to cope with a bad day. So here was the experiment. For 30 full days, I would give an AI system real, direct access to my actual finances, my checking account, my savings, my recurring bills, and a small investment account. I set aside specifically for this. Not a demo, not a simulation, real money, real risk, real consequences. The rules were simple, and honestly, brutal. Rule 1, I could not override any decision within the first 24 hours. If the AI decided to move money, cancel a subscription, or shift funds into an investment, I had to let it happen and only evaluate afterward. Rule 2, I had to give it access to everything. Every account, every card, no hiding a safe account in the background just in case things went wrong. Rule 3, I would document every single day, good or bad, and show you exactly what happened, including the parts that made me want to throw my phone across the room. If this sounds like a genuine recipe for disaster to you, an accident waiting to happen, you're not wrong. To feel that way at all, stay with me, because week 2 is where things got genuinely terrifying. Week 1, the honeymoon phase. The first few days felt like magic, honestly. I connected my accounts to the AI system, fed it my monthly income, my fixed expenses, my debt, and my Vague, half-formed financial goals that I'd never actually written down before. Within minutes it had built something I had never had in my entire adult life, an actual, real-time map of where my money was going. And the first thing it did was almost insulting. It found 6 subscriptions I had completely forgotten I was paying for. Streaming services I hadn't opened in over a year, a meal kit trial that auto-renewed into a full membership, a cloud storage plan I was paying for on top of one I already had through a different service. Altogether, this invisible spending was quietly draining close to $200 a month out of my account, money I genuinely believed I didn't have. The AI didn't just flag them, it cancelled the ones it was confident I didn't need, and it flagged the borderline ones for a quick yes or no decision, within the first 48 hours, before I'd even really started. I had already recovered more monthly cash flow than I usually manage to save in an entire quarter. Day 3 is when it started building what it called a behavioral map, basically a pattern of when and why I spend impulsively. It noticed I made most of my unnecessary purchases between 10 at night and midnight, almost always on my phone, almost always after a stressful day. It started sending me a single notification during that window, not a lecture, just a number. You've spent $40 on non-essential purchases this week. At this pace, that's $480 a year. No judgment. Just the math, laid out plainly, right when I was most likely to make an impulsive decision. I hated it. It worked. By day 5, it had automated something I'd been meaning to do for literally years, a real savings system. Instead of me manually moving money at the end of the month, whenever a certain amount hit my checking account, a small percentage would automatically shift into savings before I even had the chance to see it, let alone spend it. Out of sight, out of mind, and suddenly growing. By the end of week 1, on paper, everything looked incredible. I had more visibility into my own finances than I'd ever had. I felt like I'd found a cheat code. But here's the thing about handing full control to a system that doesn't actually understand your life the way you do. It doesn't know what matters to you emotionally. It only knows what's optimal on a spreadsheet. And that difference was about to cost me. Week 2, when it got uncomfortable. This is the part of the video I almost didn't include, because it made me look genuinely reckless. But you deserve the full picture, not the polished version. Remember that 3:47 in the morning transfer I mentioned at the start? That happened on day 14, right in the middle of this week, and it's the moment the experiment stopped feeling like a fun content idea and started feeling real. Here's what happened. The AI had been tracking my checking account balance and noticed it consistently sat well above what it calculated I actually needed for expenses and a safety buffer. Based on the rules I gave it, rules I agreed to, rules I set myself, it was authorized to move excess idle cash into a higher yield investment account whenever the balance crossed a certain threshold. Technically, it did exactly what I told it to do. Emotionally, waking up to a text that said, "Transfer completed, $400 moved to investment account," with zero context felt like a violation. My brain didn't process it as, "Your money grew." My brain processed it as, "Your money is gone and you don't know where." I sat there at 4 in the morning, heart racing, genuinely questioning whether I'd made a huge mistake. Letting a machine touch my real financial life. This is the moment a lot of finance creators would cut from the video, because it doesn't make the AI look flawless. But I think it's actually the most important 5 minutes of the entire experiment, because it exposed something nobody talks about, the real risk of AI money management isn't that the AI makes bad decisions. It's that it makes technically correct decisions in a way that completely ignores how humans actually feel about their own money. Money isn't just math to us. It's safety, it's control, it's the difference between sleeping soundly and lying awake at 3 in the morning. So on day 15, I made an adjustment. not to abandon the experiment, but to fix the actual flaw. I added what I started calling the comfort buffer, a separate rule. The AI could optimize aggressively, but it had to leave a clearly labeled emotional safety net untouched, and it had to explain, in plain language, before making any transfer over a certain amount, not just after. This one change completely transformed the rest of the month. The AI wasn't the problem. My instructions to it were the problem. And that's a lesson that applies to a lot more than just finance apps. Around day 17, something happened that genuinely surprised me. I got a notification that didn't feel like a robot at all. It read something close to this: your spending pattern this week suggests stress-related purchases. Consider reviewing before your next paycheck arrives. It had connected to things I never explicitly told it to connect: my calendar showing a rough week at work, and my spending spiking right after. It wasn't reading my mind. It was reading my patterns. And the patterns, it turns out, say more about us than we'd like to admit. By the end of week 2, I wasn't scared of the system anymore. I was scared of how well it understood me. Week 3, the turning point. If week 2 was about trust being tested, week 3 was about the payoff starting to show up in actual numbers. I want to be completely transparent here because I know exactly what you're thinking. Of course the numbers look good. This is a video. You're going to make it look impressive. So let me give you the boring, unglamorous details instead of just a highlight reel. My debt payoff plan, which I had been meaning to restructure for roughly 8 months without ever actually doing it, got completely reorganized in about 11 minutes. The AI ran the actual math on every single balance, interest rates, minimum payments, due dates, and restructured my payments using something close to an avalanche method, prioritizing the highest interest debt first instead of the small, satisfying balances I'd been chipping away at out of habit. On paper, this small reordering saved me an estimated interest cost that, if I stuck with the new plan for the full repayment period, would come out to several $100s I would have otherwise handed straight to a bank for absolutely nothing. My investment allocation, which had been sitting untouched and slowly drifting out of balance for over a year, got rebalanced automatically based on my actual risk tolerance rather than the risk tolerance I claimed to have when I filled out a form 2 years ago and forgot about it. Turns out, past me was a lot braver on paper than current me actually felt in his gut, and the AI adjusted for that honestly, based on how I'd reacted emotionally to the market dip earlier in the month. But the moment that really hooked me happened on day 22. The AI flagged something I would have never caught in a million years. A recurring, annual charge from a service I barely used, priced in a way that made it look small on a monthly basis, was actually costing me almost triple what a competitor offered for the exact same service. Buried in fine print I never read. The pricing had quietly increased 3 separate times over 18 months, each increase small enough that I never noticed, never questioned, never cancelled. This is exactly the kind of slow financial leak that drains people over years without ever setting off an alarm, because no single moment feels significant enough to act on. The AI didn't just point it out. It negotiated, it found the cancellation policy, initiated the switch to a cheaper equivalent, and completed the whole thing before I'd even finished reading the notification explaining what it was about to do. This is the part where I have to be honest with you about something, because a good creator doesn't just show you the wins. Not everything the AI did over these 30 days was perfect, and I'd be lying to you if I pretended otherwise. On day 25 it made a call I genuinely disagreed with, shifting a chunk of my short-term savings into a slightly higher risk position right before a stretch of market volatility. It wasn't a disaster, it wasn't even really a mistake by the numbers. But it was a decision I wouldn't have made myself, and watching a temporary dip happen to money I'd earmarked for a near-term goal was uncomfortable in a way that no spreadsheet fully prepares you for. I stepped in, I overrode it, and that, more than anything else in this whole experiment, taught me the actual right way to think about AI and money. not as a replacement for your judgment, but as a second brain that catches what your first brain misses, while you keep the final say on anything that actually matters to you emotionally. Week 4, the final results by the last week, the system and I had settled into something that felt less like an experiment and more like an actual partnership. Here's where I lay out the real numbers, unfiltered. Total recovered from cancelled or downgraded subscriptions over the 30 days, enough to meaningfully move the needle on a monthly budget that had felt permanently tight for over a year. Total additional interest saved through the debt restructuring, projected across the full repayment timeline if I keep following the new plan, a genuinely significant amount that a human version of me would have taken months, maybe years, to figure out on my own, if I ever got around to it at all. Total moved into savings automatically, without me lifting a finger, without me feeling the loss of that money because it never sat in my checking account long enough to feel spendable, more than I had managed to save in the previous several months combined. And the number that actually stopped me in my tracks, total impulsive spending, the 11 at night, stress-driven, forgotten about by morning kind of spending, dropped by more than half compared to my average month before the experiment. Not because I suddenly developed superhuman willpower, because the friction was removed at exactly the moment I needed it most, and because someone, something, was finally paying attention to my money as closely as I should have been paying attention to it all along. But here's the part nobody talks about in these videos, and it's the part one think matters most. The real value wasn't the money. It was the awareness. For the first time in years, I actually understood where every dollar was going, why it was going there, and what it was doing for me. The anxiety I used to feel opening my banking app, that low-grade dread that lives in the back of your mind, was almost completely gone by day 30. Not because the numbers were perfect, because I finally had visibility instead of avoidance. The 3 myths I believed before starting this. Before I go any further, I need to walk you through 3 things I genuinely believed about AI and money before this experiment, because I was wrong about all 3, and I think a lot of you watching believe the exact same things right now. Myth number 1, I thought an AI system would be cold and robotic, spitting out numbers with zero understanding of context. I pictured something like a glorified calculator that would tell me to stop buying coffee. The most tired, useless piece of financial advice on the internet. That is not even close to what happened. Instead of generic advice, it noticed specific patterns unique to my life, the timing of my spending, the emotional triggers behind it, the exact services quietly overcharging me. It felt less like a calculator and more like a financial advisor who had been secretly watching my bank statements for years and never once judged me for what it found there. Myth number 2, I assumed handing over control meant losing control. I thought, AI manages your money meant I would wake up one day and simply not recognize my own financial life anymore, that decisions would happen to me instead of with me. What actually happened was closer to a negotiation. Yes, week 1 felt like a loss of control, and yes, day 14 at 3:47 in the morning terrified me, but by week 3, the relationship had shifted into something collaborative. The AI proposed, I approved, or I overrode. It was never as autonomous as the scary headlines about AI managing your money make it sound, and honestly, the version that works best isn't full autonomy at all. It's a partnership with clear boundaries. Myth number 3, and this is the big one, I thought this would only work if I already had a lot of money to manage. I assumed AI financial tools were built for people with complicated investment portfolios, multiple properties, 6-figure incomes. The opposite turned out to be true. The people who benefit most from this kind of consistent, unemotional attention to their money are the people living closest to the edge, the people for whom one forgotten subscription or one missed due date actually matters. If anything, this experiment proved that the less margin for error you have, the more valuable this kind of system becomes, not less. A day-by-day look inside the system. I want to pull back the curtain for a second and show you exactly what this actually looked like on a technical level, because I think a lot of people picture something more dramatic than the reality. Every morning, before I even woke up, the system generated what I started calling my financial weather report. 3 lines. Nothing more. Current available balance after accounting for upcoming bills. Any unusual activity flagged from the day before. And one single, specific, actionable suggestion: never more than one, because I quickly learned that more than one recommendation a day and I would simply start ignoring all of them out of overwhelm. Throughout the day, it worked silently in the background, categorizing transactions the second they happened instead of me trying to remember, days or weeks later, what a mysterious charge from a card processing company I didn't recognize actually was. This alone eliminated a problem I didn't even realize I had. The slow, creeping anxiety of an unfamiliar transaction sitting on my statement for 2 weeks before I finally worked up the nerve to investigate it. At the end of each week, it generated a short summary, not a wall of graphs and charts designed to make me feel like I needed a finance degree to understand my own money, but plain language. Something like, you spent 12% less on dining out this week than your average. Your emergency fund is now covering 19 days of expenses instead of 14. Small, human, understandable numbers instead of overwhelming dashboards nobody actually reads. And whenever it needed my input on something that genuinely mattered, not the small stuff, but the decisions with real emotional weight, it asked, in plain language, and then it waited. That waiting part turned out to be the most important design choice in the entire system, because the version of AI money management that actually earns trust isn't the version that moves fastest. It's the version that knows exactly when to slow down. The mistake that almost cost me: I promised you the full picture, not the polished version, so here's a mistake I haven't mentioned yet, and it's one I'm still a little embarrassed about. On day 20, I got impatient. Everything had been going so smoothly that I decided to test the system's limits on purpose, almost daring it to fail. I manually input a fake, emergency expense scenario just to see how it would react under pressure, without telling it this was a test. Its response wasn't the problem. Its response was actually smart. It immediately identified which funds to pull from in a way that minimized any penalty or lost interest, and it laid out a short-term plan to rebuild the buffer over the following 2 weeks. The problem was me, in the process of setting up this fake scenario. I fat-fingered an actual transfer amount, moving real money to the wrong place because I was rushing through a test I didn't need to run in the first place. For about 4 hours, I genuinely believed I had lost several $100s to my own carelessness, while trying to outsmart a system that was working exactly as intended. It wasn't the AI's fault at all. It was mine, born entirely out of overconfidence, the exact kind of human error the entire experiment was supposed to help eliminate, ironically caused by me trying to prove a point instead of just trusting the process I'd already built. The money wasn't actually gone. A same-day correction fixed it before it caused any real damage, but that 4-hour window of pure panic taught me something important. The system isn't the risk. Human impulsiveness, even when it's dressed up as testing the system, is still the biggest risk in the entire equation, every single time, no exceptions. How this compares to a human financial advisor: I know some of you are thinking, this all sounds nice, but couldn't a human financial advisor do the exact same thing? And that's a completely fair question, so let's actually compare the two honestly, instead of pretending one is obviously better. A human advisor typically checks in with you once a quarter, maybe once a month if you're paying for a premium service most people genuinely cannot afford. They're working with dozens, sometimes hundreds, of other clients at the same time, which means your specific 11 at night impulsive spending pattern is simply never going to be something they have the bandwidth to notice, let alone act on in real time. The AI system checked in daily, not once a quarter, daily. It caught a slow creeping subscription price increase within days of it becoming a genuinely bad deal, something a quarterly human review would likely have missed for another 2 or 3 months, quietly costing me more money the entire time. Cost is the other obvious factor. A human advisor typically charges a percentage of assets managed, or a flat annual fee that can run into the thousands of dollars, a genuinely significant barrier for anyone who isn't already financially comfortable, which is more than a little ironic, given that those are often exactly the people who need the most help in the first place. But here's where I have to be fair to the human side of this comparison, because it matters. A human advisor understands nuance and AI still struggles with. They understand that you're not investing for retirement in the abstract, you're investing so you can retire and finally spend real, meaningful time with your aging parents. They understand that a stressful week wasn't just elevated non-essential spending. It was your dog's emergency vet visit, and no dollar amount attached to that decision was ever a mistake. No matter what the numbers technically say, that kind of deep, human context is something no AI system fully replicated for me over these 30 days, and I don't think it's likely to anytime soon. The honest conclusion, the one I actually believe after living through this, the best system probably isn't AI instead of a human, or a human instead of AI. It's AI handling the boring, repetitive, consistency-dependent daily grind, freeing up a human, whether that's a professional advisor or simply you being more intentional, to focus entirely on the bigger, more emotionally complex decisions that genuinely deserve real human judgment. What this means for the future of money, zoom out with me for a second, because I think what happened over these 30 days is actually a small preview of something much bigger that's already reshaping how an entire generation is going to relate to money. We are rapidly moving toward a world where the biggest financial advantage most ordinary people will have isn't access to more capital, or better investment opportunities, or insider information. It's access to consistent, personalized attention, something that used to be reserved almost exclusively for the genuinely wealthy, the people who could afford a dedicated team watching their finances every single day. For most of history, that level of daily financial attention was a luxury. Now, it's becoming something close to a basic, accessible tool, and that shift is going to widen the gap between people who adopt it early and people who dismiss it as a gimmick, in exactly the same way that the gap widened decades ago between people who started investing early and people who waited on the sidelines, convinced it wasn't for people like them. I'm not saying this to hype up a piece of technology. I'm saying it because I lived it for 30 days. And the difference between knowing you should track your spending and actually having something track it for you, consistently, without fail, every single day, is genuinely the difference between good intentions and real results. The uncomfortable truth: I want to say something that might be a little controversial, especially on a platform full of videos telling you AI is either going to save your finances or destroy your life. The truth is boring, and it's this: the AI didn't do anything I couldn't theoretically have done myself. Every single decision it made was based on math I technically had access to, information that was technically sitting in my own accounts the whole time. It didn't have secret access to some magical investment strategy. It didn't predict the market. It didn't do anything superhuman. What it did was pay attention, consistently, without getting tired, without getting embarrassed, without avoiding the numbers on a bad day. It did the boring, repetitive, emotionally uncomfortable work of actually looking at my money every single day for 30 days straight, something I had never once done for myself in my entire adult life. That's genuinely the whole secret. Not intelligence, consistency. And that's a little bit terrifying if you think about it, because it means the gap between where most of us are financially and where we could be isn't a knowledge gap. It's not that we don't know we should track spending, or negotiate bills, or rebalance investments. We know, we just don't do it, because doing it consistently, honestly, without flinching, is genuinely hard for a human brain wired to avoid discomfort. The scariest part of this whole experiment wasn't the 3:47 in the morning transfer. It was realizing that the only thing standing between me and a healthier financial life this entire time was me. Is this safe? Genuinely, it depends entirely on the guardrails you set up before you start, not on the technology itself. Week 1 of this experiment, without the comfort buffer, without a clear override rule, without transparency before big moves, was genuinely reckless, and I'd tell anyone watching this not to start the way I started. Week 3, with those same protections in place, felt like one of the safest financial systems I've ever used, specifically because the boundaries were clear and consistently respected. Did it actually make good decisions, or did I just get lucky over 30 days? Fair question, and an honest one. Some of what happened, the subscription cancellations, the fee negotiation, the debt restructuring, wasn't luck at all. It was just consistent, disciplined attention applied to information that was sitting in my accounts the entire time, waiting for someone or something to actually look at it closely. The riskier moves, the investment rebalancing, the timing of certain transfers, those carry the same real uncertainty any financial decision carries, AI-assisted or not, and 30 days isn't nearly enough time to fully evaluate long-term investment performance with any real statistical confidence. Would this work for someone in a completely different financial situation than mine, someone with debt, someone with a regular income, someone just starting out with almost nothing saved? Honestly, I think it might work even better for those situations than it worked for mine, because the core value here isn't optimizing an already comfortable financial life. It's catching small, repeated mistakes before they compound into much bigger problems, and those small mistakes tend to matter most, disproportionately, for people with the least margin for error in the first place. If you want to try something like this yourself, I'm not going to pretend I have this perfectly figured out after just 30 days, and I'm definitely not going to tell you to blindly copy exactly what I did. But if any part of this made you curious about trying a version of it yourself, here's the honest, unglamorous starting point I'd actually recommend, based on everything I learned, including the mistakes. Start smaller than you think you need to. I gave full access to everything on day 1, and while it ultimately worked out, it also gave me that 3:47 in the morning scare that could have easily turned me off the entire idea permanently. A more reasonable starting point is connecting one account, seeing how the system behaves, how it communicates, how it handles a single mistake or misunderstanding, before expanding access further. Build your comfort buffer before you need it, not after a stressful transfer forces you to realize you needed one all along. Decide in advance which money is purely mathematical and which money is emotional. Untouchable, off limits regardless of what the optimal spreadsheet decision might technically be. And take the daily attention seriously, even the boring parts, even the days when the summary says nothing dramatic happened at all. The entire value of this experiment wasn't the dramatic 3:47 in the morning moment. It was the quiet, consistent, unglamorous daily attention that I had never once given my own finances before, the kind of boring consistency that never makes for a dramatic thumbnail but genuinely changes your financial life over time, one unremarkable day at a time. Would I do it again? Short and honest answer, yes, without a doubt, but with the guardrails I built in week 2 from day full autonomy without a comfort buffer, without transparency before big moves, without a clear override rule, is genuinely reckless, and I don't think anyone should hand over complete control the way I did in week 1, but a system that manages the boring, repetitive, emotionally exhausting parts of money. While I keep the final say on anything that actually affects how I feel, that's not just useful. Honestly, 30 days in, it started to feel necessary, like something I'd been missing this entire time without realizing it. I'm not telling you to go connect your entire financial life to an AI system tomorrow. I'm telling you what actually happened when I did, the good, the terrifying, and the boring middle parts that never make it into a highlight reel. One more thing worth mentioning here, because I think it genuinely surprised me more than almost anything else in this entire experiment. Somewhere around day 27, I noticed I had stopped feeling that low-grade dread every time a notification came through from my banking app. For years, that specific Little buzz in my pocket had quietly triggered a small flinch, a half-second of bracing myself for bad news before I even looked at the screen. By the final days of this experiment, that flinch was simply gone, replaced by something closer to mild curiosity. That shift, more than any single dollar figure I've shared with you, is the part of this month I think about the most, because it wasn't something I set out to measure, and it wasn't something I expected an AI system to be capable of changing at all. The bigger theme hidden inside all of this, if you strip away the AI angle entirely, the interesting thing about this experiment, and everything it revealed, isn't really about technology at all. It's about attention, and what happens when something in your life finally gets it consistently, without excuses, without avoidance, without the emotional friction that normally gets in the way. Think about how many areas of life follow this exact same pattern. Health, relationships, work, even hobbies we claim to care about but rarely give real, consistent attention to. We already know, intellectually, almost everything we need to know to improve most of these areas. We know we should exercise consistently. We know we should communicate more directly with the people we love. We know, on some level, exactly what a healthier financial life would require of us. The knowledge was never really the missing piece. What's usually missing is the unglamorous, repetitive, sometimes uncomfortable follow-through, day after day, especially on the days when nothing dramatic is happening and it would be so easy to simply not bother. That's the actual gap this experiment exposed for me, and I don't think it's unique to money at all. I think money just happens to be one of the areas where the consequences of that gap show up the most clearly, in numbers you can't argue with, in a bank balance that either grew or shrank while you weren't paying close enough attention. The phone call I didn't plan on filming somewhere in the middle of week 3, my younger sister called me, not because she'd seen any of this online yet, but because she was drowning in a completely unrelated mess, 2 overlapping payment plans, a car repair she couldn't afford, and a due date she'd genuinely forgotten existed until a letter showed up. I was mid-sentence explaining the comfort buffer to her when she just said, half joking, half desperate, "Can your robot fix me instead?" I hadn't planned on turning this into a second storyline, but I asked her permission. Connected a single account of hers, just one, nothing close to the full access I'd given for my own accounts, and let the same system take a look, purely as an observer at first, no automation, no transfers, just analysis. What it handed back wasn't a lecture. It was a short, plain list. 3 overlapping subscriptions billing on almost the same day every month, which explained why her account always looked emptier right after payday than it should have. A late fee that had quietly repeated 4 months in a row because the due date sat 2 days before her paycheck landed, a timing mismatch nobody had ever pointed out to her in plain language. And 1 recurring charge from a service tied to an old job she hadn't worked at in over a year. None of that required intelligence in any dramatic sense. It required someone, or something, to actually sit with her numbers for longer than the 6 anxious seconds she usually gave them before closing the app. That's the part that stuck with me more than anything from her call. My sister isn't careless. She isn't bad with money in the way people love to shame each other for online. She's busy, she's overwhelmed, and she'd built the exact same avoidance habit I had, just with different specific numbers attached to it. We didn't turn her situation into a full 30-day experiment. She wasn't ready for that, and honestly, I don't think everyone should jump straight to full account access the way I did. But we did shift her due dates to land 3 days after payday instead of 2 days before it, a change so small it feels almost embarrassing to mention, and within a single billing cycle, that 1 repeating late fee disappeared completely. I bring this up because it reframed something for me. This whole month, I kept talking about my own numbers, my own subscriptions, my own 3:47 in the morning scare. But watching the same basic approach help someone else, someone who hadn't signed up for a video, who wasn't performing anything for a camera, made the whole thing feel less like a personal experiment and more like something worth actually taking seriously. What the older budgeting apps never got right. I want to address something a few of you are probably already thinking, because I thought it too before I started this. Budgeting apps have existed for years. Spreadsheets have existed forever. So what was actually different here? I went back and looked at 3 separate budgeting apps I'd downloaded and abandoned over the past several years, the digital equivalent of gym memberships nobody uses past February. Every single one of them required me to do the work of interpretation. They'd show me a pie chart of where my money went, sure, colorful, satisfying to look at for about 10 seconds. And then leave me to figure out what to actually do about it. None of them ever said, in plain words, cancel this specific thing, or move your due date 3 days later. They handed me data and quietly assumed I'd turn that data into action on my own, at 11 at night, exhausted, exactly the moment I was least equipped to do that kind of thinking. That's the actual gap, not access to information, translation of information into a single, specific, doable next step. A pie chart telling me 30% of my spending went to food and dining is technically accurate and completely useless on its own. Being told, plainly, that a specific delivery habit on a specific 2 nights a week was costing roughly the same as a full tank of gas, and being offered a one-tap way to set a soft weekly cap on it, is the difference between information and actual behavior change. I don't think the older apps were badly built. I think they were built around the assumption that seeing your numbers clearly would be enough to change your behavior. It never was for me. Seeing the pie chart just made me feel worse without giving me anywhere to put that feeling. The quiet research behind why this actually works, I got curious enough during week 2 that I went down a bit of a rabbit hole reading about why humans are so consistently bad at exactly this kind of long horizon. Low stakes in the moment decision making. I'm not going to pretend I became an expert overnight. But a few ideas kept coming up that mapped almost perfectly onto my own 30 days. There's a well-documented tendency for people to weigh a loss far more heavily than an equivalent gain, which explains, almost too neatly, why the 3:47 in the morning transfer felt like such a gut punch. Even though my net worth hadn't actually decreased at all, the money hadn't disappeared. It had simply moved somewhere I couldn't immediately see it, and my brain treated that invisibility as loss regardless of the underlying math. There's also a well-known bias toward whatever feels good right now over whatever benefits us later, which is basically a scientific way of explaining 11 at night impulse purchases. In the moment, the discomfort of resisting a purchase is immediate and real, while the benefit of not making that purchase is distant, abstract, and easy to discount entirely. And there's a phenomenon around decision fatigue, the idea that every choice we make throughout the day draws from some shared, limited reserve, so that by the time we're scrolling in bed, we've got almost nothing left to resist with. That single insight reframed the entire "I hated it, it worked" moment from week 1 for me. The notification wasn't outsmarting me through some clever trick. It was simply arriving at a moment when I had more mental resources left than I would have had 2 hours later, catching the decision earlier in its life cycle instead of at its most vulnerable point. None of this is exotic. Most of it, honestly, is stuff a decent psychology class would cover in a single afternoon. But knowing it intellectually and having a system that actually accounts for it in real time, on your actual accounts, turned out to be 2 completely different experiences. The weekend I tried to break it on purpose, properly this time after the fat-fingered mistake on day 20, I wanted a real answer to a question that had been nagging at me, so on a quiet Saturday during week 4, I ran a more careful, honest test instead of a reckless one. I deliberately fed it a scenario involving 2 competing near-term goals, a chunk of cash that could either accelerate the higher interest debt or top up the emergency fund, both technically reasonable uses of the same amount, and I wanted to see whether it would just default to whichever option won on paper, ignoring everything about how differently those 2 choices would feel to actually live with. It didn't just pick the mathematically optimal answer and move on. It laid out both paths side by side, in plain language. Including the parts that don't show up on a spreadsheet, how thin the emergency fund would feel afterward, how much interest continuing to accrue on the debt would cost over time, and it explicitly flagged that this was a case where my own risk tolerance mattered more than any formula it could run. Then it waited. It didn't nudge me toward either option. It just presented the honest trade-off and let me sit with it. I ended up splitting the amount roughly in half between both goals, a decision that isn't mathematically optimal in either direction. And one a purely numbers-driven tool would probably have quietly discouraged. It didn't discourage it at all. It confirmed the split, explained what each half would actually accomplish, and moved on without a single hint of judgment. That weekend told me more about the actual design philosophy behind this than almost anything else in the entire month. It wasn't built to make the best decision for me. It was built to make sure I had the full, honest picture before making my own decision, which is a much harder thing to build well and a much more useful thing to actually live with. The cost of all this, because I know you're wondering, I've talked a lot about what I gained, so let's talk honestly about what this actually cost me, because I managed my finances for free, would be a lie, and I'm not interested in telling you one. There was a monthly fee involved, roughly comparable to a single streaming subscription, which felt almost darkly funny given that the very first thing it did was cancel several subscriptions I'd forgotten about, more than covering its own cost within the first week alone. I'm not going to pretend that math works out identically for everyone. Someone with fewer forgotten subscriptions and less impulsive spending to begin with would see a smaller immediate return, and that's an honest limitation worth naming instead of glossing over. There was also a cost I didn't expect going in, one that's harder to put a number on. A small but real adjustment period where I had to get comfortable with a level of financial visibility I'd spent years actively avoiding. Some nights that visibility was uncomfortable in a way no subscription fee shows up as. Facing exactly how much a rough week at work had cost me in stress-driven spending wasn't free, emotionally, even if the dollar amount was small. I think it's worth naming both of those costs plainly, because a lot of these videos, mine included if I'm not careful, tend to only talk about the upside. The upside was real, it wasn't free, and it wasn't instant. And pretending otherwise wouldn't be honest. A conversation with someone who builds these systems toward the end of the month, I ended up on a call with someone who works on the product side of tools like this, mostly because I wanted to understand what was actually happening on their end when the system asked me a question instead of just acting. The thing that stuck with me most from that conversation was how deliberately the weighting was designed. According to them, the earliest internal versions of tools like this leaned much more toward full autonomy, moving money, adjusting budgets, making calls without pausing for input, because on paper, faster action produced better numbers in testing. But the actual people testing it hated it, for reasons that had nothing to do with the accuracy of the decisions. They described feeling exactly what I felt at 3:47 in the morning. That sense of something happening to them instead of with them, and enough people abandoned the tool entirely after one uncomfortable surprise that the team rebuilt the entire interaction model around pausing before anything with real emotional weight. I asked directly why it doesn't just do everything automatically if it's confident in the math. The answer was blunt in a way I appreciated. Confidence in a calculation and confidence in how a person will feel about that calculation are two completely different things. And building a tool that only respects the first one produces something technically impressive and practically abandoned within a month by almost everyone who tries it. That lines up with everything I lived through. The version of this that would have actually failed me wasn't a version that made worse decisions. It was a version that made decisions I couldn't trust, because trust, it turns out, isn't built by being right. It's built by being transparent about the reasoning before the fact, consistently, even when being transparent slows things down. The spending category nobody talks about. There's one specific pattern the system caught that I haven't mentioned yet, mostly because it embarrassed me a little too much to bring up earlier. Somewhere around day 23, it flagged a recurring pattern of small purchases, nothing dramatic individually, $5 here, $12 there, all clustered specifically around moments right after I'd had a disagreement with someone close to me. Not stress in general, specifically that. I hadn't consciously connected those dots at all. I genuinely thought those small purchases were random, forgettable. The normal noise of a month. Seeing them laid out together, tied to a pattern I hadn't noticed in myself, was uncomfortable in a completely different way than the 3:47 in the morning transfer had been. That discomfort wasn't about losing control of my money. It was about realizing how much of my spending had never really been about the things I was buying at all. I don't have a tidy resolution to that one. I didn't fix it in a week. And I'm not going to pretend a finance tool solved an emotional habit that clearly has nothing to do with finance at its root. But naming it, plainly, in a short weekly summary instead of it staying invisible forever, felt like the beginning of actually understanding myself a little better, which is a strange thing to say about something that started as a video idea about bank transfers. What happened after the 30 days officially ended? I mentioned earlier that I'd keep the system running past the experiment, and I want to be honest about how that's actually gone rather than leaving it as a vague promise at the end of a video. The comfort buffer stayed. The transparency before big moves rule stayed. What changed, gradually, over the days right after day 30, is how much I actually needed the daily notifications at all. By around day 35, the financial weather report. Most mornings had genuinely nothing new to say, not because the system stopped working, but because the patterns it had spent a month correcting simply weren't recurring anymore. The 11 at night spending window stayed quiet on its own. The subscriptions stayed cancelled. The savings kept moving automatically without needing a single manual nudge from me. That, more than any individual number from the original 30 days, is the result I actually trust the most, because it wasn't measured during the experiment at all. It showed up afterward, quietly, in the absence of problems rather than the presence of impressive-looking wins, which is a much less exciting thing to film but a much more honest signal that something actually changed instead of just performing well for a month on camera. One last number I held back until now. I've walked you through recovered subscription money, saved interest, automated savings, reduced impulsive spending. There's one more number I deliberately saved for last, because I think it means more once you've heard everything else first. Total time I personally spent actively managing money during these 30 days, checking the account, reviewing summaries, approving or overriding decisions, combined, less than I used to spend in a single average week before this started, doing a far worse job of it than the system did in a month. That's the number that actually convinced me this wasn't a gimmick, not the dollars recovered. The hours returned to me, quietly, while the actual financial outcomes improved instead of getting worse in exchange for that time back. A quick note on privacy, because someone will ask. I know exactly where a chunk of the comments on this video are going to go, so let me address it directly instead of dodging it. Handing over full account access means handing over a genuinely detailed picture of how someone lives. Not just numbers, patterns. What time you're awake. What you buy when you're stressed. Where you shop, how often, and how that shifts around difficult weeks. That's not a small thing to hand to any system. And I don't think it's something people should do casually without actually reading what they're agreeing to. Before starting, I went through the access permissions line by line, which is admittedly not a thrilling way to spend an evening, but it mattered here more than it usually does. I looked specifically for what could be shared beyond the tool itself, what could be sold or used for anything outside of actually managing my accounts, and what the actual process would look like if I wanted to revoke access entirely and walk away. That last part mattered more to me than almost anything else on the list, because a tool that makes leaving difficult is telling you something important about its priorities before you've even started. I'm not going to pretend every reader is going to go do that same careful reading before trying something like this, and I'm not going to pretend every version of this kind of tool handles that responsibility equally well. That's genuinely a do your own homework situation, and if you take nothing else practical from this video, take that. The moment my partner got involved around day 26, my partner asked to actually see what this looked like in practice, partly out of curiosity, partly out of a healthy amount of skepticism about the entire idea. We sat down together one evening and went through the week's summary side by side, which turned into a conversation neither of us expected to have. Seeing our shared expenses laid out plainly, the recurring costs that belonged to both of us versus the ones that were purely mine, sparked a conversation about money that we'd genuinely been putting off for longer than either of us wanted to admit out loud. Not a dramatic conversation. Just an honest, slightly overdue one, made easier by having neutral, plainly worded numbers in front of us instead of vague memories and mild resentment about who paid for what last time. That wasn't something I expected going into this experiment at all. I thought this would be a solo month, just me and my own accounts. Instead, one unremarkable Tuesday evening turned into one of the more useful money conversations we'd had in a long while, entirely because the numbers were already organized, already translated into plain language, and neither of us had to be the one doing the uncomfortable work of gathering and interpreting them first. What I'd still want an actual human FOR as much as this month reshaped how I think about day-to-day financial management. There are specific moments I genuinely wouldn't want to hand entirely to a system, not out of distrust, but because some decisions are tangled up with things no algorithm has direct access to. Anything involving a major life change, a career shift, a decision about where to live, whether to combine finances more formally with a partner, deserves a conversation with someone who can sit with the messiness of a decision that doesn't have a clean numerical answer. A system like this is genuinely excellent at the daily, repetitive, pattern-based work. It's not built, and I don't think it should pretend to be built, for the handful of decisions each year that are more about values than arithmetic. I think that's actually the healthiest way to think about where a tool like this fits. Not as a replacement for judgment, but as something that clears away the daily noise so that the handful of decisions that genuinely deserve careful human thought actually get it, instead of getting the same rushed, exhausted, 11 at night attention as everything else. The last thing I noticed, right before finishing this video while putting this whole video together, I went back through 30 days of notifications, summaries, and small nudges. Mostly to double check the numbers I'm sharing with you, and reading through them all at once, back to back. Instead of one at a time the way I originally experienced them, something became obvious that I hadn't fully noticed while living through it day by day. The tone never changed. Not once across 30 days did a single message carry any hint of judgment, frustration, or disappointment. Even on the days I clearly deserved at least a little of that. Day 20, right after the fat-fingered mistake, the message was calm, factual. Focused entirely on the fix rather than the error. Day 14, right after the transfer that terrified me. There was no defensiveness in the follow-up explanation, just a clear, patient walkthrough of exactly what happened and why. I don't think I fully appreciated how much that steadiness mattered until I saw it laid out all at once. A human advisor, even a genuinely kind one, would have a tone. A good day, a tired day, an opinion about my choices they were trying politely not to share. 30 straight days of the exact same calm, plainly worded attention, with zero variation based on how I'd actually performed that day, turned out to be one of the quieter reasons this whole thing worked as well as it did. Looking back at all of it now, the sister who finally got her due dates fixed, the Saturday I tried and failed to trick it into a purely mathematical answer, the uncomfortable little pattern of spending after an argument that I'd never once noticed about myself, none of it really reads like a story about a clever piece of software. It reads more like a small case study in what patient, steady, undistracted attention can quietly rebuild, given enough ordinary days in a row to work with. So when I say this experiment changed how I think about AI, I don't mean I suddenly believe artificial intelligence is going to fix every messy, complicated part of being a human being. I mean it forced me to confront something uncomfortable about myself, something I'd been quietly avoiding for years, dressed up as, I'm just not a numbers person, or, I'll deal with it eventually. The truth was simpler and a lot less flattering. I just hadn't been paying attention, consistently, honestly, without flinching. And for 30 days, something finally was. That's the part of this whole month that actually stuck with me, long after the numbers stopped feeling impressive and started just feeling normal. Not the dollar amount recovered from forgotten subscriptions. Not the interest saved on restructured debt. The simple, almost embarrassingly obvious realization that consistency beats intelligence, every single time, in almost every area of life, and that the biggest financial unlock available to most of us was never a secret strategy or a hidden investment opportunity. It was simply showing up for our own money every single day, the way this system did for 30 days straight without ever once getting tired, embarrassed, or distracted. I keep coming back to that 3:47 in the morning moment, and honestly, looking back now from Day 30, I don't think about it with fear anymore. I think about it as the exact instant this stopped being a content experiment and started being something real, something that actually mattered, something that genuinely changed a habit I had failed to change on my own for years despite knowing, the entire time, exactly what needed to happen. There's also a quieter side effect I didn't anticipate when I first agreed to this experiment, one that has nothing to do with dollars or interest rates. My relationship with my own phone changed. Instead of opening my banking app with a sense of dread, bracing for bad news the way I used to, I started opening it out of genuine curiosity, almost the way you check the score of a game you actually care about. That shift in emotional relationship to a single app is, honestly, worth more to me right now than any of the specific numbers I've walked you through in this video, even though it's the hardest part to actually put a dollar figure on. What I'd tell myself on day one if I could go back and sit down with the version of me who was about to hand over full access to every single account on day one, nervous, a little skeptical, mostly doing this because it seemed like a genuinely interesting experiment rather than because I truly believed it would change anything. Here's exactly what I'd say. You're going to panic on day 14, and that panic is going to feel completely justified in the moment. But it's not actually about the money. It's about control, and the discomfort of realizing how little of it you've actually had over your own finances for years, even before any AI was involved. Sit with that discomfort instead of running from it, because it's the most honest thing that happens the entire month. You're going to want to quit around day 20, right after the fat-fingered transfer mistake that was entirely your own fault, dressed up as testing the system when really you just got overconfident. Don't quit. That mistake is going to teach you more about your own impulsiveness than any amount of budgeting advice ever has, and it's going to happen precisely because you stopped trusting a process that was already you're going to be tempted, somewhere around week 3, to credit the AI entirely for everything that's going well, and to quietly forget the very real, uncomfortable adjustments you made yourself in week 2 that made all of it actually work. Don't do that either. The system was never going to succeed without you setting the right boundaries first, the comfort buffer, the transparency rule, the clear override. Give yourself real credit for that, because most people never even get that far. Most people never even start. And by day 30, when the numbers finally come in, and they're genuinely better than you expected, don't let the dollar figures become the whole story you tell about this month. The real story was never really about the money at all. It was about finally, for the first time in years, paying real attention to something you had been quietly avoiding, and discovering that the avoidance itself, not the lack of intelligence, not the lack of resources, was the entire problem the whole time. So here's my honest, unsponsored take after living through this for 30 full days. AI managing your money isn't magic, and it isn't dangerous either. It's a mirror. It shows you, with brutal consistency, exactly where your money has been going and exactly what your habits actually cost you over time, without any of the excuses your own brain is so good at making at 11 o'clock at night. If you found this useful, or if it made you a little uncomfortable thinking about your own bank app right now, that's exactly the reaction I was hoping for, because I felt it too. Let me know down in the comments, would you ever hand over full control of your finances to an AI for 30 days? Or does that 3:47 in the morning transfer sound like your personal nightmare? I want to hear it, because honestly, some of the best follow-up experiments I've done have come straight from the comments section on videos exactly like this one. If this kind of honest, no fluff breakdown is what you're here for, subscribe, because I'm already planning the next experiment, and trust me, it's going to be even more uncomfortable than this one. Before you go, let me leave you with one last thought, because I think it's more useful than any single number I've shared in this entire video. 30 days ago, I genuinely believed the biggest obstacle standing between me and a healthier financial life was some missing piece of information, some strategy I hadn't discovered yet, some secret the finance world was keeping from ordinary people like us. It wasn't that. It was never that. The information was already sitting there, in accounts I already had access to. The Entire time. What was missing was consistent, honest attention, applied every single day, without excuses. Without avoidance, without waiting for a better time that realistically was never going to arrive on its own. If there's one small thing you take from these 30 days, let it be this. You don't necessarily need an AI system to start. You need to actually open the app you've been avoiding, look at the number you've been avoiding, and make one small, boring, unglamorous decision today that your future self will thank you for. That's genuinely the whole secret, and it took me handing my entire financial life over to a machine to finally understand something that's simple. And if you're sitting there right now thinking, this sounds interesting, but my situation is messier than his was, I want to gently push back on that thought, because mine was messier than I let on to, before day one, forgotten subscriptions, avoided statements, a savings habit that existed only in theory. Messy is exactly the starting point this was built for. Now I want to hear from you directly. Would you ever hand over full control of your finances to an AI? For 30 days the way I just did? Or does that 3:47 in the morning transfer sound like an absolute nightmare you'd never risk? Drop your honest answer in the comments below, because some of the best follow-up experiments on this channel have come directly from conversations that started right there. And if this kind of honest, unfiltered, no fluff breakdown is exactly what you come to this channel for, make sure you're subscribed, because trust me, the next experiment I'm already planning is going to be even more uncomfortable than this one, and I want you here for it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.